So we'll just wait for the number of participants to climb. It does take a while for people to join, and we are only just at 2 o'clock. For those who are just joining, we're waiting for all the participants to be able to enter. So we're just taking a couple of moments to ensure everyone is able to join before we start. Welcome, Nigat. We're just waiting for the number of participants to rise a bit further before we kick off. Well, I think we'll begin at this point. So thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Jodie Blackstock. You'll see I'm not a Sweeney, who sadly is unwell today and was unable to join us very sadly. As a result, I am the treasurer of the Bar Human Rights Committee, and hopefully I can step into her shoes and assist in chairing this event as smoothly as she would be able to. So I'm delighted to welcome you to today's panel and interactive workshop on protecting mental health and building resilience, a dialogue for human rights defenders. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us. For those of you who don't know the Bar Human Rights Committee, we are an independent and non-political body of barristers called to the Bar of England and Wales, which is dedicated to promoting the principles of justice and respect for fundamental human rights through the rule of law. Our aim is to promote and protect international human rights in countries outside of the UK, and we achieve this through trial observations, fact-finding missions, intervening in cases through amicus briefs and training programmes, as well as engaging with government officials through statements of concern and meetings. And we work closely with our international, regional and in-country partners to achieve this. And so I'm delighted to meet our speakers today and look forward to being able to work with you in the future on this really important issue. All lawyers are familiar with the stress and responsibility that comes with running a practice, representing and defending the interests of their clients. And the International Bar Association's 2021 report on mental well-being in the legal profession cites the stressful nature of the work, the intensive work and time demands, the poor work-life balance, and high levels of pressure as key factors impacting well-being in the legal profession overall. But human rights work demands extraordinary resilience and courage from defenders and practitioners who often work under immense personal risk and pressures. This can put them at risk of anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress, and these can also manifest as physical illnesses. These conditions can lead to burnout and drive human rights professionals to exit the human rights field entirely. And as the Human Rights Resilience Project, which a number of our speakers are involved with, has noted, a University of York study has also identified the harmful influence of strong social and cultural norms about self-sacrifice, heroism, and martyrdom in human rights work, and the pressure that defenders feel about needing to be and to appear to be brave, as well as insufficient focus on mental health in the human rights field being given. There's also growing concern about the urgent need for change in institutional and organisational culture that impacts human rights work and the well-being of human rights defenders. And as such, our discussion today is incredibly timely, and it will explore the complexities of trauma, vulnerability, and resilience in the context of human rights work, and share strategies for looking after our mental well-being in what is increasingly a complex, hostile, and risky global environment for human rights defenders. We may also naturally touch on how organisations that we lead and work with can do better to support human rights defenders, but we do intend to cover that in a follow-up session. So if your questions relate to that, then do try and hold those for the next occasion. For today, however, we aim to explore the challenges, personal risks, and psychological impacts experienced by those of us in the human rights field, exchange good practices in managing skepticism, hopelessness, and burnout, and proactively managing the emotional toil human rights work can take, and learning how to consciously and positively nourish commitment to the crucial work that we as human rights defenders do. We also aim to highlight the ways in which human rights defenders can maintain mental health, build resilience, learn self-care and self-protection strategies, and importantly, create vital spaces for self-reflection to better understand and navigate the risks our work involves. So in the first part of our session, we will hear from our speakers about their experiences and insights, and that will be followed by a question and answer session. There'll be plenty of time for questions, so please do put any questions you have in the Q&A box as we go along, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. The second half of our session will be an interactive workshop led by Dr. Gemma Holdy, who will lead us through a series of reflective exercises to get us all to think more carefully about self-care and collective care in human rights work. So that leads me to introduce our excellent panel of speakers. If I can start with Nigat Dad, who is the Executive Director of the Digital Rights Foundation in Pakistan and a member of the Meta Oversight Board, and she will give our first presentation, followed by Satyajit Gupta, who is the Secretary of the IBA Asia Pacific Regional Forum and is a member of the IBA Wellbeing Task Force. Dr. Sana Hamza will then speak, who works at the Restart Center for Rehabilitation of Victims of Violence and Torture in Lebanon. And following her will be Anjali Paran, who works at the Project of War Crimes and Mass Graves at the Human Rights Clinic and Institute in Columbia Law School. And finally, Gemma Holdy, who is the author of The Vulnerable Humanitarian and will lead the session I've just indicated for us. So if I can then turn to Nigat to start us off, please.
Thank you so much, Judy, and thank you for organizing this workshop and session, because it's very timely, and not only sharing our own personal experiences, that how as a woman human rights defender in a majority world, the kind of attacks that we face and the kind of burnout that we face due to our work, but also do we have any space to address the burnout that we face. So my work, I work on digital rights in Pakistan. I've been working for the last 1 decade. I run an organization called Digital Rights Foundation. And over the years, what I have seen through my work is that one very important issue that have come up in our work, and eventually we had to do something about it, was online violence against women in Pakistan, and not only young women and girls who access information and communication technologies, but also in recent years, how activists, women human rights defenders, women who are visible in these in the online spaces, be it political personalities or women journalists, the way they are facing targeted abuse, hate, and targeted coordinated disinformation campaigns, those are very, very not only just restricted to the digital harm, but also the kind of harm that that they faced in the offline space as well. And this is constant and it's increasing. One thing that I have I have personally, and I'm also one of the victims of this constant hate, unfortunately, and maybe like later in our session we might discuss this, that how women human rights defenders normalize this kind of constant hate, or the burnout that they face due to their work. Mental well-being, the psychological impact, the fear and anxiety. And the worst part is that in most of our communities, the lack of acknowledgement of being burnout. There are not many spaces where activists can actually talk about that. Listen, I am burnout and I cannot be part of certain things now, or I need to take care of myself. There are not many conversations are happening around self-care. And I feel that it's very important to sort of see, like how these conversations are happening in the global north and in the global majority, and it's still a taboo here. Now, many young feminists have started talking about self-care or mental well-being, but still those spaces are very restricted. People like myself, who are part of the older movements also, there is an expectation that we'll keep going on, and we have to show up at protest. We have to show up at the meetings where there's like sense of urgency in our activism all the time. And if you don't show up, people actually think that you are not a true activist. And this is just something that I personally feel that that's how usually communities when they do not acknowledge that yes, self-care is important in our community, that's where this kind of judgmental sort of attitude sort of activists sort of face. I just wanted to say that it's the reason of burnout is not only due to the work that we do or the activism, but also the kind of environment that we live in. It's very, very important to bring in all the factors, the shrinking civic spaces, how the funding is shrinking, how the states are coming after activists, and especially women human rights defenders, because in patriarchal societies, it's already very difficult for us to make our own space. And when powerful actors come after you and try to target your resources and try to target your work, then it's not only the burnout that come from the work and activism you do, it's also the burnout of keep fighting, like fighting back against these powerful actors, their attacks on your organizations, their attacks on your resources, and how they try to sort of stop the resources coming into your jurisdiction as well. And that's also a burnout that might not come from the activism, but also like fighting back against these actors. So I'll just stop here because I'll keep going on, and that's what burnout do to you, because you are like at least some, like, there is a space where you can actually talk about that. So I leave it here and looking forward to the other panelists.
Thank you, Nigat. That's very important to recognize a point when we should stop and take a break. But thank you. You've introduced some really important features of what the problems are there for others to no doubt pick up on. Anjali, can I hand over to you next, please? Thank you.
Of course. Thanks, Jody, and thanks to all of your team for organizing this wonderful panel. And as Nigat said, I think it feels very timely and urgent and important to discuss. So a little bit about me. I'm a lawyer and educator from Kenya. Most of my practice, my human rights practice, works to investigate mass atrocities using legal tools and scientific tools. But I'm also part of a team of researchers and practitioners that look at well-being in the human rights field. I'd say, similar to Nigat, part of the reason that I care and have become interested in these issues is that a lot of my work involves significant exposure to trauma. And early on in my practice, I found that there were very few resources to support human rights advocates and the unique needs and concerns that may face the human rights field. There might be general resources looking at support for doctors or those who are working in emergency fields, but that doesn't address the nuances of what happens when the state is trying to attack you, or what happens when you're the target of online hate or online abuse. There might be resources to support veterans, but their concerns are quite different. And so with some colleagues, we started doing research and trying to build up a knowledge base, both for ourselves and for the human rights community as a whole. And we found a couple of things. First, that as Nigat was saying, human rights advocates experience significant exposure to direct and vicarious trauma. So a lot of what is inherent in human rights work, speaking to other people, doing interviews, documenting human rights abuse, is in and of itself a significant exposure to trauma. We found that 72% of the human rights advocates we interviewed were conducting interviews, and that a large number of them were witnessing violations of basic needs, but also that they were threatened by the government. Some of them were arrested by the government. And so there was this direct threat to who they were. So this led us to really thinking about, at least as an initial hypothesis, to what extent does trauma and exposure to trauma lead to challenges with well-being? And we started to ask and do more qualitative interviews with human rights advocates from around the world to say, what are the sources of your stress? What keeps you burnt out? What makes your job hard to do? And we found that it was much more complicated, and that the reality of this is, in fact, not quite the same. So for sure, vicarious exposure to trauma, online attacks, online hate, direct exposure to trauma was a significant piece of what causes stress for human rights advocates, but also things like discrimination and bias, stress and overwork, in precarious and poor working conditions, having to look for funding that was short-term or project-based all of the time. And then things like poor management, bosses being overworked, unable to respond to teams, and a sense of perceived inefficacy. We've been showing up at these protests for 20 years. If we don't, we'll be called out. And at the same time, is what we're doing actually effective? Because a lot of the time, human rights advocates are up against extremely strong governments or non-state actors. And the work that you're doing is incremental and in many ways can be about not going backwards and trying to prevent something from getting worse. And this can really lead to a sense of hopelessness and inefficacy from human rights advocates. And we found that that was quite the case. And that there was a lot of effects of this, conflict with colleagues, isolation and withdrawal, anxiety, PTSD, depression, family impacts. But what we've also seen is that there is tremendous resilience and creativity and ideas from within the human rights field, especially groups that are most targeted, and especially some of the groups that have the fewest resources, as grassroots feminist groups are coming up with unique and new ways to support themselves and to support each other. I won't talk too much about the different types of ways in which we found advocates are responding to this, because I know that other speakers will be focused on that. But just to say that, what we found was, one, that the issues are really rather complex. It's impossible to separate out just traumatic work with the range of other stresses that human rights advocates face. Two, that the solutions are pretty broad and are tailor-made depending on context. So for some organizations, they felt that there was very little trust within the organization to be able to speak to each other and be peer support for each other. Or, for example, the head of an organization felt that they couldn't do a peer support network with their staff because there was an inherent power imbalance. And instead, they preferred to talk to other leaders from other countries who are in the human rights field who experience similar stresses of leading an organization. We found that the types of concerns that people raise require different solutions, but that there's enormous vibrancy and resiliency within the human rights field itself, and that advocates are taking creative steps to try to resolve the challenge and try to work in a more sustainable manner across the human rights field. So I'll stop here, but happy to speak more in the questions.
Thank you so much, Anjali. Yes, and underlining again where the issues are arising, but also very helpfully starting to think of some solutions, which is great. I'm sure we'll want to focus on those more. So can I now please hand over to Dr. Sana Hamza for her contributions, if you may.
Thank you, Judy, for your clear introduction. And thank you also for hosting me to be in this meeting. It's an honor to me to join you. Okay, so I would like to share now my screen if it's possible. Yeah. My screen, yeah, it's already. Opa. Share screen. Yes. It's okay. It takes time sometimes, sorry.
Having practiced this earlier, obviously it now doesn't work. Is there anything we can do to assist you?
Are you hearing me?
Yes, I can hear you. I was just saying, obviously having practiced it earlier, it now isn't working typically. We can't see your slides. Can you just try pressing it again? Whatever you did last time did work, so hopefully it will work if you persevere a little more.
Do you want me what? Do you want me to put?
We can't see the slides, Sana.
Okay. I see how to do. Share screen. It's pause maybe. This one. Share.
There
now you see?
We can, yes, thank you, that's great.
Great, okay. So great, because finally, throughout this presentation, I will be covering the importance of self-care, how it's priority to listen to our body, to listen to our pain, and how it's normal to share our feelings with others. If you don't take care of yourself, of ourselves, how you will be able to take care of others? Taking care of ourselves is something that many of us claim we don't have time for, but this is about it. Think about it. You know, sometimes we lost our file in the computer because we don't have, for example, 2 minutes to save the file on hard disk. So the computer will crash. And it's the same for us. If we don't give ourselves a few minutes each day, we also crash. I would like to ask you if you can relate to any of these pictures. If you relate to any of this picture, please raise your hand in the screen. So I can see hand raised. More. I think I didn't see anything. Nobody can relate to any of this picture, it seems. Only me.
Yes, I definitely put my hand up there, Sana. I think
okay,
we are all putting our hands up.
So great, because just you did that. I feel that I'm not alone in feeling this way. It's great. Thank you. Who is prone to burnout? Me, I am prone to burnout. You are prone to burnout. Lawyers are prone to burnout. Individuals working with victims of enforced disappearance in courts like lawyers, judges, individuals working on detention places, human rights defender, individual in conflict zone, paramedical, religious, journalists, you are all prone to burnout. Why is self-care so important? Stress impacts us in many ways, whether through mood swings and anger, or through bodily symptoms and difficulty in focusing. Source of caregivers' stress are numerous. They include many issues. I want to talk only, because of time, about frequent exposure to complex cases, including court cases, which may lead to vicarious trauma. I would like to say something. Working with torture and trauma survivors has really changed me. Torture survivors would often say, I am not the same anymore. Working with these individuals has made me realize and feeling that me too, I am not the same anymore. And all my family and friends observe this issue. My friend also, my colleague are not the same anymore. Lawyers working in detention and in forensic units are not the same anymore. So as you see in this picture, there is a lot of exhausting, no creativity, poor performance. Yes, there is nothing creative or fun to brighten up her office. So what are the warning signs of burnout? This sign can be physical, such as weight pain and feeling tired, emotional, such as high anxiety or depression, cognitive, such as inability to think straight, or behavioral, such as anger outbursts. If we keep on racing against time to finish things without finding a little time to pause during the day, we will almost reach the stage of burnout. Stress can have an impact on us during a session. We may feel tired, react impulsively, avoid asking certain questions, such as asking about details of trauma, procrastination for court cases, or, for example, avoiding to interview family of enforced disappearance, etc. Stress may additionally impact us after a session. The boundaries between personal and professional may become blurred. Lawyers, judges may find challenging to focus on anything that's not related to work legal case, for example. They may find it difficult to talk to people, including loved ones, such as friends or family, avoiding to go out. Sometimes me also, people ask me, my friend, let's go out. Always, I'd love to, but I have had an exhausted day at work. Maybe next time, and next time I say next time also. Procrastination to my pleasure. So we may feel tired, find it difficult to sleep, or we may have nightmare. All these reactions may lead to burnout, then inability for job performance. Some people believe that burnout is a form of PTSD. Looking at the characteristic of PTSD, looking at the chart here, I think we can check each item for burnout. In order to decrease our burnout and to avoid falling down in the Cartman drama triangle, we should work on ourselves. So the Cartman triangle, this is when each of us become a victim. The drama triangle was first described by Stephen Cartman in the 1960s. You can look on it on, for example, on the Google. You can Google it and you can see where are you in this triangle. It's a model of dysfunctional social interaction and illustrate a power game that involves three roles: victims, as you see here, persecutor and rescuer. And victim always say, "I'm helpless." He say, "I'm poor me." And the persecutor is judgmental, angry, aggressive, discount others' value, and always says, "It's your fault." And persecutor and rescuer say, "I can help you." He needs to be needed. So everyone became victim in this victim. In order to go from this triangle, dramatic triangle, to dynamic triangle, I know that we don't have control over other people, but we can control ourselves. Over ourselves, we can have control over ourselves if we can move from blamer to challenger, from rescuer to coach, why not? And from victim to survivor and thriver. It's important to find a balance between caring for others and caring for ourselves. By caring for ourselves and our pain, we may become more confident and efficient. By being good to ourselves, we would be good. We will be doing good things to others. Now I will talk a little bit about our aim at Restart Center for Care for Caregivers program. This program was developed gradually over the past 25 years. It's tailored towards our teams and clients' priority. Restart Center also developed Care for Caregivers manual as a step-by-step practical guide to assist organization in implementing similar intervention with their teams, like, for example, step related to psychological debriefing, strength-based intervention, self-hypnosis, and other strategies and outline. Some of Care for Caregivers program, several team members are trained on the provision of caregivers. As you can see here, they make some relaxation, some yoga. Let's focus a little bit on debriefing. Here are some pictures of psychological debriefing sessions that were conducted with our team. We provide them session as a way to vent and talk about their feelings. Debriefing is not type of therapy or for PTSD, it's a form of emotional discharge. For whom the debriefing? For everyone, for us, human rights defender, lawyers and judges, workers situation or located near area of conflict war. All of us need to express this traumatic memory stored in my mind in a good way. A debriefing session is a typical debriefing session looks like have four norm, like fact. We start by a fact. For example, if we talk now about Ukraine situation, we make a lot of debriefing session for people working with Ukrainian professionals. They talked about the fact. It's a fact. It's a war. They express their emotion. They talked about their emotion. We normalize and validate the emotion, and then finally providing hope and assigning the date for the next follow-up session, which could be after 3 weeks or 1 month. We cannot open once without closing again. Working with victims of torture, arbitrarily arrest and enforced disappearance may be stressful. Some may reach a point of job exhaustion, for sure. There is burnout. We should blow up this fire. We should before having all burned, being all burned. The protocol, this professional quality of life scale protocol, which can be found online for free. It assesses compassion satisfaction, burnout, and secondary traumatic stress. It's easy to do it. We recently applied this tool with some specialists in our team. And fortunately, our team reported high compassion satisfaction and low secondary traumatic stress. Burnout scores are average. Therefore, we were planning to make something during summer, for example, go weekend for the beach or for the mountain. We are planning to do something to decrease burnout. We cannot what we say, avoid burnout, but we can decrease burnout. As you can see in this picture, one hand can't clap, for sure. By creating a safe setting where individuals can express their feeling freely without being judged, they often experience a sense of relief. We don't feel alone. We have to move to dynamic triangle. It's important to remember that emotional stress reaction to abnormal situation are normal reactions to abnormal situation. Our stress is normal. What do you do to cope with stress? I have put some things you can do to cope with stress, like for example, shopping, relaxation, going to the beach, listen to the music, playing music, fishing, cooking, going for hiking, anything. For me, for example, I like to go for fish, and I do it. I do it from time to time. And I like also to go out with friends and celebrate, for example, something. I would like to thank you for listening to me. And I will say that one hand can't clap. That's why we need all hands to clap together. Thank you.
Thank you, Sana. That's a really good phrase, I think, for us to remember. One hand can't clap alone. Can I move now on to Jenna for her presentation, please?
Thank you, and thank you to the other speakers. As much as we might say we are wellbeing experts, I always feel I'm continuing to learn from others and the context that you all work in. So my background is in the human rights and humanitarian programs. I have worked for human rights organisations. I've also worked for other international NGOs. And it was that experience that really inspired me to go and study a PhD on burnout. I went through my own burnout as well. And when I did, I realised that this is a topic that many people talk about, but how is it actually being addressed? And that was my point of inquiry, really, when I studied the PhD. That PhD has now become a book, which was mentioned in the introduction, The Vulnerable Humanitarian, which I will discuss more about in the workshop that comes after these presentations. But it is a book that's not just about the sort of classic humanitarian work, but it's also about the specific problems and risks of human rights work, which some of our speakers have already mentioned are in some ways exclusive to doing human rights work. And the book also contains solutions and practices and recommendations for what we can do collectively, but also what our organisations can do as well. But yeah, I would just like to talk about partly some of the sort of things that I argue in the book, but also sort of drawing on my own experience, having worked for human rights organisations and the challenges that I found there. And I suppose echoing in some ways what others were saying, it's a very, very difficult environment to express what's really going on for you. And that is partly because our focus is so much on others and supporting others who have often been through dire situations that are incomprehensible. They're certainly incomprehensible to someone like me who comes from a fairly privileged, comfortable background. And so we then feel quite guilty to express what's going on for us, even to ourselves, to even admit that perhaps we are struggling. And that's something I was very much aware of working with human rights organisations. It would then mean coming into the workplace and sharing anything like that was extremely hard. It was all really about getting on with the work. And so perhaps I would have been interviewing victims of torture or victims of other human rights violations back to back all day. And there's no space to then actually process what's just happened. I'd go into the office and it would all be about writing up the report about what I had documented. I would say that it is an organisational culture that doesn't really welcome those sorts of conversations. And whilst I would say that's across the board really with similar organisations, humanitarian organisations, development organisations, I think there are sort of some specifics related to human rights organisations that stand out. I know already it was mentioned about just the so I've just lost my train of thought. What was I going to say about that? I'll come back to that. But what I notice with human rights organisations is because a lot of the work is based on fact finding and taking often an adversarial approach to how we resolve human rights cases, it creates a sort of us and them mentality, or a right and a wrong. And I think that feeds into the entire working culture as well. So when it comes to actually talking about our emotions, our emotional experiences are not observable facts that you can pinpoint and prove and validate in quite the same way as a human rights case. And yet that's kind of our conditioning when we're working for these organisations. And I think that's an added layer there that makes it very hard for people to actually sort of tap into what's actually going on for them, and then to express it without feeling judged. So we talked, Sana was talking about the triangle, I was trying to remember the name, the Cartman drama triangle, the rescuer, the perpetrator, particularly those two I'm interested in there, and the victim, of course. But I think often there is a sort of judging, blaming culture that's the sort of perpetrator role, really, that can make, as a human rights defender, make you feel very guilty for feeling ill. And I think that's certainly an aspect that I really noticed, which makes bringing these conversations in even harder. So a lot of my work is around how do we kind of get out of that quite heady stuff that's quite fact and evidence-based, which of course is very important for the work that we do, but drop a bit more back into emotions and what's really going on for us emotionally, and how can we create those spaces where it feels safe to have those conversations. It's not just about having a counselling system in place, although of course that's important. It's also about creating spaces where people can be real with each other, can remove their professional masks and actually be more human with each other. So that is the work I'm interested in, and I'll share more of that in the workshop that follows. But I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gemma. There's some really interesting thoughts there. So we'll look forward to exploring those with you further. And then last but not least, Satyajit, if you would please like to give us your presentation. Thank you. And do take your full time.
Thanks, Jody. And, absolutely fascinating discussion, and great to hear from these panelists. And as I think, mentioning at the beginning, I'm the sort of color on this panel. So I will, sort of talk a little bit about coming from the, sort of the backdrop of having worked on the IBA survey, which we did over, actually, interestingly, most of it was around the pandemic and post-pandemic. But the project was aimed at looking at the mental well-being of legal professionals around the world. And interestingly, it followed a similar project which looked at the incidence of bullying in the legal profession, which was, which I think we did around 2018. It's quite interesting because, for me, it was even more interesting because, I come from a slightly a country which is, which has probably a large number of lawyers. We have close to 2 million lawyers in India, qualified professionals. However, there is absolutely, I would say, very, very minimal support for lawyers, whether it is, not only mental well-being, but even physical well-being. Lawyers are largely sort of professionals, independent professionals who have absolutely no, I would say, social security other than, if they hit it big in terms of and a large proportion of the profession obviously is struggling. During the pandemic, we had photographs of lawyers who were wheeling carts of fruits and vegetables in various cities, and lawyers who were sort of driving cabs in different parts of India, which obviously, was the result of an extreme, perhaps those were extremes which were caused by the pandemic, with courts being shut and, only very, very critical cases being taken up. But it obviously, does show the need for, support. And I think we did get some very interesting sort of observations from the survey, and I will share a few key findings, which I'm sure will be self-evident, but for a number of lawyers and definitely our local regulators, the local bar, leaders of the bar were things that they, I think, still haven't been able to accept. One of the key sort of things, and I think in the South Asian and maybe the Indian context, definitely, is there a tremendous amount of stigma around talking about mental health. Across the survey, more than half of the professionals who were surveyed indicated that a fear of impact on their career would put them off discussing their mental well-being within their organization or even with other professionals. We saw a lot of professionals talking of the difficulties, the levels of difficulties of mental well-being being experienced by certain segments of the legal profession. Largely, those segments were the younger lawyers, female lawyers, lawyers from ethnic minority and/or disabled or physically or mentally challenged, the proportion. This does not, of course, mean that these groups are in some way weaker, but does suggest a strong interrelationship between mental well-being and issues of equality, diversity, and inclusivity. Also, we spoke about how this raises significant challenges around recruitment, of course, retention, and shape of the future legal profession. Not so much only in the context of, I suppose, and I think a lot of these observations are probably across the board, whether you are actually a lawyer in a corporate law firm or whether you're a lawyer who's actually going out day to day and taking up public interest litigation or sort of doing human rights work. Key issues which we saw which contribute to difficulties with mental well-being included the stressful nature of work, included intensive work time demands, poor work-life balance, and very, very high levels of pressure. Now, time pressure was specifically brought out, and this was seen to have a significantly negative impact on lawyers' mental well-being. However, in certain specific segments of the profession, especially transposing it to the Indian context, the independent lawyers or sort of the self-employed professionals in the bar tended to see a lot of bullying and harassment, and this appears to have, of course, a tremendous and extremely detrimental effect. And I think specifically talking about the self-employed legal professionals, we did see that a lot of them were specifically affected by the lack of support, lack of some sort of a collegial work atmosphere, and general uncertainty about what's going to happen. Some years they've got a lot of work, or maybe some amount of security in terms of the financial health and financial sort of situation, and that also impacted the mental well-being. We did see a lot of professionals talking about employing self-care mechanisms. Now, I think those were evolved largely through trial and error. I think none of them, or a majority of them, did not really, I suppose, identify that as self-care, but did see mechanisms such as exercise, physical exercise, taking break, therapy, etc., helping. A minority we did also see were absolutely, sort of didn't talk of health self-care, and I think hadn't stumbled across that as well. And they would, in fact, I would say, not a minority, but a large proportion were coping using potentially unhealthy mechanisms such as alcohol, recreational drugs, and various other similar outlets. And in fact, this study, the IBA study, the recent study, contrasted quite starkly with previous research, which concluded that alcohol and substance abuse levels are much higher amongst lawyers than general population. So I think maybe it is a function of the respondents that you find, and how many of them are within those probably high risk groups that this would come up. And we have also suggested, the task force has suggested further work to be done around these areas. I think in terms of we definitely, because we did it around the pandemic, we did see the COVID-19 pandemic had increased levels of awareness of mental well-being amongst organizations as well, especially a number of organizations, even in India, were talking about having well-being breaks, giving people certain time off for certain periods when they were more vulnerable than others. Although some of it seemed to be cosmetic and sort of just responding to probably some internal feedback coming through. But I think the fact that the people are talking about it is important. Interestingly, in the Indian context, we did see a number of smaller, probably law chambers, etc., talking about following some amount of mindfulness in their business practices. So whether it was calling sort of lawyers to office over the weekends, or giving work, for example, and setting deadlines, they were definitely being far more open around this situation. I think to go to I just wanted to share, I don't know where I am in terms of time, but if I can take a minute or two, I wanted to speak a little bit about the Indian context as well. And a slightly dated study that was conducted by an organization called Vahura mentioned that I think they saw 45% of surveyed lawyers in India feeling and sharing that their lives were unbalanced, and approximately half of them felt underpaid. And of course, this was a survey not around mental wellness, but it spoke of around the law firms to work for and what are the best places to work for. And I think what they found was this was regardless of which firm or which practice or what kind of work they were doing. They did speak and allude to mental health issues. They spoke a lot about uncompromising and difficult supervisors, and the desire, interestingly, I quote, to wring every rupee out of those billable hours. I mean, rupee is the Indian currency, have led to significant deterioration in the individual legal professional's health in recent years. The occurrence of depression and premature, in fact, interestingly, premature retirements and untimely ill health due to these issues are tragically becoming more common amongst a new generation of lawyers who now find themselves questioning the narratives that they were sold. I think in the Indian context specifically, we have seen the legal profession sort of sort of expanding in terms of numbers, both in terms of people who are graduating and coming out into the profession, and also the number of people who are taking up the profession per se post 1991. So interestingly, in the Indian context, that was the year when the country liberalized and allowed foreign investment to come in. So somewhere when law became, a much more sought about career, this situation just kept on, this has sort of increased, and the entire and when we speak to professionals from a pre-90s sort of situation and timeline, they did speak about the fact that yes, there were periods where they went through those situations of stress. Obviously there was stress, obviously there were deadlines, but I think they did get, in terms of, they didn't have this sort of maniacal stress around having to finish work over the weekends and and work over the weekends to be prepared for and dealing with significant expansion of work. I think basically to just quickly sort of share a couple of things that we are sort of doing here and personally I'm sort of working on a small initiative locally. We are talking about, I think, 3 or 4 things. One is, I think, provision of information about options which are available for lawyers. I think a lot of lawyers, and while we've seen certain jurisdictions have a lot of awareness of mental health and what to do and who to approach, we did see that was completely asymmetric. That's not there in many sort of countries, jurisdictions. There's a very dire need of forming support groups for lawyers and professionals in this space to enable sharing and encouraging listening. Awareness sessions, I think, are important. I think, and it doesn't have to be professional to set up an awareness session. You can encourage people to come together, talk. Advocating greater acceptance and acceptability for those, and accessibility for those with mental health challenges. We all, in some of our, sort of situations, that we are able to hire professionals, able to recommend professionals, and professionals who have had to take a break, who have, because of these challenges, need to be encouraged to come back into the profession, means sort of form part of probably the mainstream and be able to come in. And I think it's very difficult to collect data about this. So somewhere, if organizations and if individuals can sort of collect, and of course it doesn't have to be data about specific people, but when we went out, I mean, we got, I think the IBA ran this survey for significant period, but I think finally got about 3,000 or 4,000 respondents, which is nothing. I mean, like we said, I mean, there are millions of lawyers around and professionals in this space around the world. So I think there's far more research, there's far more need for work to be done on this area. And I think I'll sort of just end here. And I think absolutely tremendous to see the work that this panel is doing, and I look forward to reading about more. And I think the next part of the program seems quite exciting. Thank you. Back to you, Jody.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you for those really important flags of where the problems are. I certainly can recognize many of those from my own work, from the work of my colleagues around me, and also starting to think about the solutions there. And Sana, thank you so much for those really helpful slides, which visually did bring those messages to bear. Satyajit, you just started to, I suppose, answer a question there for me. My question was kind of going to be, and it might be something we think about over the rest of this session. How do we build in the opportunities for self-care? To pick up that phrase from Sana, how do we make this occur in what are incredibly busy lives, incredibly busy workloads, and for a number of us working in self-employed practice, where do you find those connections to go to for that sort of support? I don't know whether, I mean, your program, Sana, sounds fantastic as a starting point. I don't know whether that is something that exists in a number of places now, or whether it's, you know, one amazing centre in Lebanon that sadly most of us can never get to. It would be good to know. So how do we build in those opportunities? I think we've had some starting points there from Satyajit. So Sana, can I go to you first on that, please, if you're still with us?
Sure, I am with you. So you want me to answer about
how do we build in the opportunities for self-care? And you've showed us an excellent program that's starting with your project. Are you aware of other kinds of spaces or places where these kinds of opportunities for self-care are available?
Yeah, this is great to have space and places for care for caregivers, and to give and to have, for example, special rooms in the office, for example, like Zumba or dancing or anything else. But if it's not provided, and most of centers are not this space, so we can do something very very small, like, for example, listen to each other, make like supervision or one-to-one session, listening to him as supervisor. Or, for example, we can make in research center, we have somebody who is trained in laughter therapy. We make a lot of laughter therapy, in Zumba also. And sometimes we ask somebody to come to make like a dance session, or, for example, what you call like boxing session. There is a professional name, and few of our staff continue to do this session. I don't know if they have the opportunity to talk about this experience, because they start and they continue. This is their self-care. They can do their self-care. We encourage them to do anything they let them feel better. And during the pandemic, you are not working like before. We work a lot from home, we like in remotely. So the remote session is not like face-to-face sessions. And we made a lot of training, more than 50 hours training, Zoom training daily for our staff. And we make daily like kind of debriefing and to talk about their feelings when started this remote sessions. And also we have developed a manual how to work remotely. And it's also, we can share it with you. So a lot of change is in our strategies, And also when we work from home, and we are not surrounded by people, and we cannot share, for example, our worries and our case together, and go from time to time to another room to talk, and it's a bit frustrated. We try to do anything we can to let the people feel better, but still there is burnout in the staff, because working with victims of torture, with displaced people, with refugees people, is not easy at all. And also, as someone mentioned about financial situation and basic needs, sometimes people come for basic needs. How they have nothing to feed their kids, And as psychologists, if you talk about this triangle of needs, about the Maslow triangle, they are the basic needs before. And we as psychologists, we have to work on self-affirmation and self-actuation. It's on the top of the pyramid of Maslow. So we become, when we work with people like this, they need basic needs. We become like, we feel like important. We cannot do anything for these people. So we feel really frustrated, and we talk with each other. And in Lebanon, the situation is very difficult. And as you know, the dollar is very high, and the pound Lebanese is very low. And most of people had like monthly like $20 or $30. Before it was like $700. The situation changed, so we become more and more frustrated, because working with these people, we cannot provide basic needs. We have to provide. We listen. We listen to their needs. We listen to their. In French we say, on soigne les mots par des mots. On soigne. We get rid from the pain with speech, with the word, not with let them eat or something else. It's frustrated for us. I think so. Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of the questions in the Q&A relate to this topic. So I think I'm going to ask, we've all had an opportunity to have a look through them, I think, other than one particular one, which is about families of those who are suffering such trauma. It's a group, of course, that we haven't focused on. We've focused on the individuals themselves, human rights defenders, but vicariously, families can experience that same stress and difficulty as well. So can we try and weave that in as well? Nigat, can I come to you first? I'm conscious of the time and the fact that we need to get on to Gemma's session. So if you could try and give a brief nugget, each of you, that would be immensely helpful, of your specific solutions. Let's try and be solution focused if we can.
No, very briefly, I just want to share my own experience, because I was a workaholic team leader, and maybe some of my team members still think that I'm still workaholic. I think that I have addressed that in last couple of years, because I noticed that if I'll keep doing this and keep telling my team members that they can take a break, but at the same time I'm working, and then keep sending them work emails after the working hours, or sending them WhatsApp messages after the working hours, of course they will feel the need to respond, or even if they are not responding, that adds, overwhelming sort of, feeling into the sort of. So I stopped doing that. And these are small little things where you don't need resources, just that you acknowledge that you don't have to do certain things as a team leader, so that if you are setting a right precedent, your team members will also feel at liberty to take a break. So that's what I started doing it. And I'm very conscious when, after working out, whenever I pick up a phone, I'm like, oh, this is an urgent thing and I need to send a message. I'm like, I take a step back. I'm like, no, this can wait until tomorrow. And so these are the, I think, small little things that we can do as team leaders. One thing more, that normalizing conversation around mental well-being is very important within the organization. If you shy away from these conversation as a team leader, just say, oh, the team can speak with each other and just discuss this topic because this is very important and need of the time, and you don't participate, they won't be able to do much. The organizational change that we want to see, I don't think that can happen. So you have to be part of that and believe in the cause, because if you will believe in the cause, then the change, you will also try to bring in resources, build in resources in the project proposals, so that the resources are there, and then that let the team decide how they want how they want to address mental well-being, instead of just telling them, oh, we have assigned this counselor to you and you can just, go and speak to them. No, it shouldn't work this way, because people have different needs and they will tell you that how they want to design this. So just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Yes, that's something I was very conscious of in my prior role as a team leader, and not sending those messages out of hours and making sure I force people to take breaks. But it can be very difficult to do that when you've got a deadline. I mean, that's about the work stress, the work volume, I suppose, in some respects. But how do we process through really kind of traumatic material that's being told to us on a regular basis, from being in particularly difficult regions or cases that deal with that kind of thing? Anjali, can I bring you in?
Yeah, very briefly. And I think building on what Nigat is saying, I think solutions need to be thought of at 3 different levels. At the individual level, so what can I do for myself? What are the processes and structures that I can build in myself? Not watching traumatic material at night, taking a break, actually taking a vacation. At the organizational level, and so what Nigat is saying, the importance of leadership from management, and them taking certain decisions and facilitating an opportunity for taking a break, or thinking about the fact that a one-size-fit-all solution is not there, and that you can say, here's your counselor, but nobody's actually going to take that if that's the approach. And so what are the things you can do at an organizational level to normalize, to mainstream well-being, to think about what is the organizational commitment to well-being, and to start looking at it as political. And then thirdly, at the movement level, what are the cultures of human rights that we need to start to shift to see actual change? How do we move away from a martyr culture? How do we move away from a culture that sort of puts the onus of helping on the human rights advocates, and starts to see it as, actually, if we're not thinking about sustainability and well-being, probably we're playing right into the hands of abusive states and abusive actors, because ultimately fractures in the movement, weakness in the movement, poor mental health in the movement just makes it weaker and makes the work harder to do. And so I think thinking about it at 3 levels and starting to orient those solutions at 3 levels can be a helpful way to think about solutions.
That's immensely helpful, thank you. Gemma, can I move on to you now? And I am conscious that there are specifics in your questions that people have asked. I don't know that we've got the time to work specifically on those particular issues that you've addressed, but hopefully you're finding these generalized ideas for solutions can be applied across those specifics that you're asking us. Will the PowerPoint slides be available? Yes, I think so. Sana, if you could send yours through to us, and again, Gemma, when we see yours, we can look to share with those who've signed up for this session, so long as that works for the 2 of you. Okay, Gemma, can I hand over to you?
Sorry, I'm unclear. Are we still answering questions, or are you moving on to my
No,
session?
we're moving on to your presentation. I think,
Okay.
because you said you would deal with it during your presentation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to share with everyone a few practical tips that hopefully will answer to some of your questions. But as we transition into this session, I'd like to actually start just putting things into practice right now. So whatever you need to do to transition to be here, maybe you need to have a little stretch, maybe you need to take some deep breaths, just to move from the last session to this one. I'm just going to take some deep breaths. So if you want to join me, then please do. You can have your eyes open, your eyes closed, whichever feels comfortable. Maybe just shifting the position in your seat if that feels good. As I say, you might want to get up and stretch, whatever you feel like doing, whatever feels right just in this moment. But I'm just going to take some deep breaths in through the nose and exhaling through the mouth. So please join if you wish to. So breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. So I find deep breathing something so important to do, and yet I myself forget to do it. But it's a very good way of just self-regulating, actually, when our nervous system is really getting worked up. So another thing I'd like to do is actually, I thought we were going to have the chat, we're not going to have the chat box open for this session. So I can see the other people on who have joined us. You're muted, Jodie, sorry. Jodie, you're muted. Okay, we didn't hear what you said there, Jodie, because you're muted.
I was asking Louise if she could please put it onto speaker view so that Gemma can not be distracted by our breathing exercises and stretching and so forth. Although I hope that was useful for participants who are watching to feel like they were given permission to join in with that, as we all did that collectively. But yes, I can't change that, so hopefully Louise will be able. Oh, it is on speaker view.
Are we?
Oh, there we go.
It's because
we didn't know, so
okay.
it doesn't come up for us, perhaps.
Yes, there we go. So it means that we can engage with other people that are on this call. Fantastic. So I'm just going to share my screen now. Just a second. Okay, here we go. So I want to just put this question to you all. So we're talking about kind of easy ways for self-care. Well, a starting point is actually to check in with yourself. And I do find in our culture, particularly English culture, it's very common to just say, how are you? And then for however you're feeling, to say, I'm fine. And not really to dig deep into what's really going on. So a very practical way of just doing it a bit differently is to finish off these 4 sentences. What makes me happy is, what makes me sad is, what makes me worried is, what makes me excited is. So the invitation is just to check in with yourself right this moment about how you're feeling right now, and to see if you can finish off those sentences. So for instance, I can just give myself a check-in here. What makes me happy? I'm going to be very English and talk about the weather and say, just starting the day with some sunshine. I'm very lucky I live right opposite the sea, so I'm able to go straight outside and actually go into the sea in the morning. So that makes me happy. What makes me sad is my dad's not very well, and so I am spending quite a lot of time looking after him, and he is elderly now. He's probably not got a huge amount of time left in his life, and it's a very kind of existential thing for all of us, which makes me sad. What makes me worried is my own health hasn't been great recently, and this is a big thing for me to say as a so-called well-being expert who's written a book about burnout, but I voice it because it's important to show that even those of us who supposedly do the work, the inner work of self-care, can still struggle. I've been suffering from overwhelm and exhaustion, so I think it's a collective experience. Actually, I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that, but it makes me worried, obviously. And what makes me excited is I am going away on holiday tomorrow, so I think that's going to do me a lot of good. I'm going away to Spain, which is the first time I've travelled in I don't know, like the rest of us, quite some time. So I'm excited to do that and see my friends there. So if people want to answer in the chat box, just to finish off any of those sentences, I'd love to hear it. Just that's the invitation here. Check in with yourself and write it in the chat box. I'm going to sort of keep on, well, I'll pause for a moment because I'd like to see what you have to write, but I'm conscious we've got limited time, so we're not going to hang around too long, but just keep on writing it, because the more that you share, the more you invite it from others too. And there's the starting point when we talk about self-care in the workplace, is like, how can we be more human with each other? So please do just share in the chat box. So I want to talk a little bit about my book. It was published last year. It's drawing on my PhD research, which was conducted in Kenya, and it was research on burnout in the aid sector, but that absolutely did include human rights organisations, and it included Kenyan staff and other staff from the Global South, as well as Global North expat staff. But also the book is very much a personal account. It's about my experiences as a white woman, you know, acknowledging my privileges and the differences between my experiences of mental health and well-being compared with the experiences of some of my colleagues in the Global South. So the approach I take is what I would call feminist, anti-racist and decolonial. It is with a view to actually noticing diversity and difference, noticing our role within the organisations that we are in, not to blame and shame that role of whether I'm privileged or not privileged, but how do we work with that? How do we become more aware of its impact on our working culture, and how might we do things differently? And that's particularly when we do talk about mental health, because often we are seeing mental health through quite a Western lens in terms of how it's diagnosed, the sort of access to healthcare to treat it, and what's available in terms of taking care of ourselves, and that can sideline alternative approaches. For instance, what I found very interesting in my research is the role of religious faith in supporting people. A lot of people I've worked with, particularly in African countries, how that supports their mental health and supports their approach to what they do. So the book includes specific policies and processes that employers can take. I know we're not really focusing on that today, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But there are also embodiment exercises for self and collective care. So really looking at what you can do for yourself, but what we can do collectively as well. So, right, let's just carry on. Hang on a second, just going to close some things down. So I'm interested to hear from you. What do you understand by this notion of collective care? Because self-care is certainly important, but when we move to collective care, what are we talking about? So I don't know if anyone wants to write down in the chat box their understanding of collective care, because it's a term that's sort of being bandied about a little bit more, but it's not always easy to grasp. And so if we're going to use it, what do we actually mean by it? Does anyone have any suggestions? So if anyone does want to write, please feel free. So what I think is important when we talk about collective care is this awareness around the needs and the lived experiences of others. So that self-care or caring for ourselves is not just an inside job. I think, again, particularly in Western societies, we've got very much into this idea that our mental health is purely our responsibility, which we then resolve through perhaps going to counselling or doing yoga or positive thinking or whatever it might be. And that really sort of lets others off the hook. It lets our employers off the hook, and it also ignores the different systems and structures we live within that can mistreat people, marginalise some people, make make getting better harder for some people than for others. So I think it is about raising that awareness, and also about considering the different approaches to mental health. Again, as I touched upon earlier, it's not just about my understanding of burnout. This is what I really understood when I did my research in Kenya, that actually these terminologies don't exist in the same way. They're not talked about in the same way. And that's partly because a lot of people, for instance, in Kenya and in other countries in the global south, are born into societies of oppression where every single day is a stressor. It's not just related to the work. So this was a very important sort of thing for me to realise when I did my research. So I just want to pose some questions here for you to reflect upon when you think about mental health and well-being. And these questions are in my book, and they are sort of posed as guideposts to consider how you might approach things differently around mental health. So the first is your approach to well-being and abuse and trauma informed by the experiences and needs of marginalized groups, including people of colour and colleagues from the global south. So this again is just recognising that the discourse on stress or burnout or trauma can often be led by white people from the global north, and absolutely those voices matter. It's not to discount those voices. It's my voice, of course, and here I am talking to you now. But it's about what might we be missing, and what are the specific needs of human rights defenders, for instance, in unsafe locations, who can't escape, who can't move away from the situation they're in. What support do they need? And indeed, what coping mechanisms do they use? What can we learn from human rights defenders who are living those experiences every day? And secondly, do the wellbeing practices, images and resources you share with colleagues promote diversity and inclusivity? For instance, if you are going to have yoga and mindfulness classes, which are becoming very popular within all sorts of sectors, the question might be, who are they led by? And indeed, why yoga? What other traditions and practices might we want to learn from each other that aren't the ones that are popular just in Western countries, for instance? And likewise, if you have a counselling service in place, who are the counsellors, and is there diversity there that can meet the needs of human rights defenders in different contexts? And who understand the context of human rights defenders as well? Very important. So I'm just going to move on just to say that in my book there is a 4-step integrated process to look at self and collective care. So you can see it up there now. I go through these piece by piece in the book around how we come back to ourselves first, generating compassion for the work that we do, remembering that this is heart work. We do it because we care. I'm assuming that's why most of you have gone into this work. And so naturally, the work we do is emotional work. So how can we acknowledge that even within ourselves? So there are exercises in the book that are around just coming back to yourself, whether it is through meditation or journaling, or other exercises that just help you remember who you are, why you're here, why you're doing this work. Secondly, also looking at our perfectionism. Just, as we were touching upon earlier, how people are kind of scared to talk out about what they feel are their limitations or their vulnerabilities, or perhaps they feel they're not making a change, that they're not having an impact, and they're judging themselves for that. So how to work with that, bring that up to the light so that we can actually just sit with it and understand that we are all with our imperfections and we all get things wrong, as well as also sometimes getting things right as well. Also, how do we lead with values? Because sometimes we're not actually embodying the things that we believe in. I'd like to sort of remember that quote from Audre Lorde, which I'm going to paraphrase very badly probably, but self-care is a political act. you know, this part of our work as human rights defenders is to know when to take a break and to absolutely value that as much as the work that we do out there, because we have to take care of ourselves if we are going to take care of others. I know this was touched upon earlier. And then lastly, this idea of cultivating brave spaces, which I was talking about in the last session. You know, how do we create space where we can have these conversations about mental health? So I'm going to just give some tips on that. I'm just checking if there's anything I need to be looking at. Okay, just checking in the chat box if there's anything I needed to touch upon, but we'll come back to that, any questions to answer. So cultivating brave spaces. I'm just going to go through a few tips and ideas of how you might do that, because we've been talking about, you know, how do we do it in a sort of maybe a cost-effective way, but also a way that isn't a tick box exercise, because a lot of this is actually about working culture, the culture of your workplace, and that sort of takes time to disentangle from what may be very unhealthy work routines and how to perhaps do things differently. And this is as much to do with leadership as it is to do with staff members, human rights defenders. So I'm just going to sort of go through a few of these. First of all, bringing ritual into the workplace. So ritual needn't mean anything too spiritual or occult, particularly if this is something you feel uncomfortable with. I'd say central to my own healing process, my own healing and recovery from burnout, has been ritual. It's the coming together of myself and others who are wanting to explore, wanting to connect, wanting to process the suffering that we experience in an intentional way to actually allow the space for that. So here are some ideas of what ritual might look like. It might be, for instance, forming a listening partnership. This is perhaps someone within your team or your organisation who you set aside 15 to 20 minutes, perhaps once a week, or as regularly as you prefer, to share your feelings and experiences. And you take it in turns to speak and to listen. So it's about practicing deep listening as well as speaking. And it's not about finding solutions. It's not about judging or trying to even make the person feel better. It's about holding the space for each other and just letting the emotions arise. Also similar to that suggestion would be forming a listening circle where you do it in a group together. I would also say these sorts of things could be done on WhatsApp, it could be done on phone calls, Zoom calls, whatever it takes to just to dedicate that space. Some other suggestions might be to start a meeting with 5 minutes of mindful breathing so that you're doing this together, just pausing as we did at the start. Or close each meeting with voicing something you wish to celebrate. I'm going to come back onto that in a moment as well, because I think we get very tied up in all that's wrong and what we're not doing and all the difficulties, and we don't always pause to actually think about what we wish to celebrate. Also perhaps finishing or starting a meeting with something else like a prayer, or if you're working, for instance, in a particular cultural context, it might be a proverb from that country, or simply doing something fun like dancing together. This is also something I've heard from certain groups and organisations of you know, setting up a playlist on Spotify and in everyone's different locations dancing to the songs that you all choose together. It's about kind of just removing our professional mask and just relaxing with each other, and through that we become a little bit more comfortable about having these difficult conversations about mental health. Secondly, creating a feedback culture, and this might be, for instance, as we started just now with having an honest check-in, having something like that where you set aside 5-10 minutes to actually allow everyone to finish those sentences. What's making me happy? What's making me sad? And to follow that up with, what help do I need to address that? That's a really important point. Really being willing to ask for help and for that to be welcomed as well. But I would also say, if you are a leader, just really being vulnerable yourself, and noticing that you too suffer and that you too struggle. So you might want to embrace some of these statements. This is from, if you're interested, this is from the book Dare to Lead by Brené Brown. Just saying, I don't know. Sometimes we feel as human rights defenders that we've got the answers to everything, and actually we don't. So can we bring that into our work environment? I don't know. I need help. I disagree. Can we talk about it? Here's what I need. Or I'd like some feedback. Or what can I do better next time? But also, very importantly, to say, I played a part in that. Or I accept responsibility for that. There's something so powerful in showing our flaws, and then we allow other people to do the same. So again, just for going beyond what I sort of say is often the adversarial approach within human rights work, and actually just, really being honest about our struggles and our vulnerabilities. And lastly, finding your support section. Now, this is really essential for any work, but I think for human rights work, when we are dealing with so many different oppressions, and some of us are also feeling quite privileged as well, how do we find that support to kind of acknowledge all of those really complex, really difficult issues? Because we're all likely to feel insecurity, we're all likely to feel shame or guilt for the work that we do. So someone in your support section is someone who gets it, who kind of understands the work that you're doing, your positioning and your struggles, and respects fully who you are. They might also be willing to challenge you, but also in a very sort of loving way. So maybe in this session, just have a think about who your support section is. Who could you be reaching out to? Whether it's someone in your work environment or someone else who really gets it. I think it's so, so important, particularly when not everyone has access to psychiatrists or psychotherapists, but just finding the people around you who understand you. So again, just to come back to what there is to celebrate, I just want to sort of finish there really. Have a reflection now on what you wish to celebrate about yourself, because this work, we can often feel that we are failing, that we're not having an impact, that nothing's changing. My goodness, I know, having done advocacy work for a number of years and feeling nothing has changed. So what are the small wins that you can celebrate? What are the things that you have done in terms of how you have shown up that you can celebrate? So some examples, for instance, might be, today I celebrate being part of this panel and being invited to speak on these really important issues. I celebrate giving support to others who perhaps do not know what's available to them, and being able to support those people and be a listening ear to them. I celebrate myself for just showing up whole and showing up with honesty about where I'm at, when it's sometimes really difficult to do that because everything else is suggesting I need to perform and pretend. So just maybe take some moments now to think about what you wish to celebrate about who you are and how you show up. This is actually a practice I do every day. Again, this is with a group, a WhatsApp group. This is something you might want to consider, where we post each day in the WhatsApp group 3 things we're grateful for and 3 things we wish to celebrate. And it's not about judging or responding to it. It's about each of us in my WhatsApp group taking a pause and checking in at the end of the day, even if it's been the toughest, most difficult day, and thinking, what did I actually, not just what did I achieve, but how did I show up, and what am I proud of how I showed up in that situation. So yeah, just another way of looking at this. So that's it. It's limited time. I'm just going to finish there, but I will say, if you are interested in reading the book with others, I do run a book club. It's a wonderful way of supporting each other as we explore some of the topics, which will certainly resonate with many of you, I'm sure, but to read it in a way where you don't feel you're alone with those problems. So do get in touch if you're interested, but also I do run training and workshops and one-to-one mentoring addressing many of these issues. So I hope this has been a good taster session in the meantime. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gemma. My voice has gone in the meantime. Listening very attentively, I think, to everything you had to say there. That is a really, really helpful taster, I think, to how we start to address these issues. I think a few people have started to sort of formulate some suggestions and put those into the Q&A box. I think it's hard though to sort of express things in a box, so I am sure everyone is thinking carefully about what you've been saying, and I know it's so hard on the screen to know if people are engaged, so I'm sure they absolutely are, and I found that immensely helpful personally, so thank you so much. We have sadly lost a couple of our speakers to court and other commitments, and I'm conscious of the time. We've only got a few minutes left.
I don't know if I can answer a little bit. It's possible or no? Is it possible?
To do what, I'm sorry?
To answer, to send a message.
To answer one of the questions?
Yeah.
Yes, I think, well, it says type answer, so if there's anything specific on there you would like to type an answer to, please do, unless you wanted to answer it now verbally. I'm just conscious of the time, so it would have to be done very quickly.
Very quickly,
you want to just do that very quickly now, please do, Sana. Okay.
They ask how they take pause when they have a pause. They ask a lot of questions related to this issue. So I would
say it again, I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear you there, so maybe others didn't either.
I cannot answer, I cannot hear. Wait, what?
I said I couldn't hear you very well. If you could just flag which question you were answering again.
You want me to write the answer, not to answer?
No, I just couldn't hear which question it was you were answering.
Yeah.
I couldn't hear you.
Human rights defenders ask how we can take a pause when we have a cause, something like that.
Okay.
Okay. So, Anna, I would like to say, caring for and defending others must always start with loving and caring for ourselves first. Defending our right to be well mentally and physically is the first right that we should advocate for. This is not a luxury, never. This is a duty that we owe to ourselves so as to be able to serve others fully and consistently. My heartfelt wish for you, for all human rights defenders or lawyers or judges or people working with victims, I wish you is to start believing in the power of self-care. It's about time we acknowledge and understand that to serve better, we need first to take care of our own well-being. It is time to create your safe space for self-reflection and self-care, and feel free to move forward. Not for next month or tomorrow or later, but now. This is your moment to become better, then you can serve better. And I would like to say to Dr. Gemma, enjoy your holiday in Spain, and I like so much your advice. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, yes. If anyone else had a very short thought to, when I say everyone else, I actually just mean frankly Nigat, because you're the only one left. A quick thought to offer, please do. Before you do that, I just want to say Mr. Abdul Ghani, I've seen your comments on here and the links that you've sent about your situation, and we will look into that and see what we can do to support you. And I'm so sorry that you've been through that experience. I think it illustrates the extremities of this work very, very clearly. And we do stand in solidarity with you and offer that support. And thank you so much for being here with us today. I hope some of this is in some way useful for you, despite, as I say, the extremes that you've been experiencing. So Nigat, just final word to you, if I can give it, please.
No, I just want to say thank you so much for doing this session, because I'm one of those people who has started their journey to, first of all, acknowledging myself that self-care is important for me. And if I'm not okay, I won't be able to help others as a woman human rights defender. And this session and everyone's contribution, Sana's, Dr. Gemma, really, really helped me. And just want to say, right after this session, I have reserved this time for me and my dog. And it's no matter what, I just spend 1 hour with my dog, because it brings so much happiness to me. And it's a therapy for me. So yeah.
Great.
Wonderful. So on that note, I think we will end it there. And I hope everyone has managed to take this 2 hours to actually have a break from their work and hasn't been trying to work as they go along. I know what it's like. I'm the worst for it. On a Zoom training session, I tend to be working as I listen, and I try and do the two things at once, which is absolutely the worst way you can do anything. So I hope you have managed to take the time and it's been useful for you, and you can follow up on some of the things that have been suggested. I did indicate we hope this will be part of a project. We're hoping we can take this forward. There's a lot of things that have come up today which are really important and need to be followed through. So do watch out, keep a lookout for anything else in this space. Speakers will probably be in touch with you as well to see if you want to assist us with that. And do take care. And if any of you do happen to be members of the Bar of England and Wales, please do have a look at our other work and consider joining us. And everyone, do take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for organising this.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. I just want to say, Jody, before you close this down, Zafar, if there is anything that I can do in terms of addressing the targeted online hate campaign against you and the disinformation, please reach out to me. I have just mentioned my email ID here, and if we can directly speak to the social media platforms to address that, at least this is something that I can actually do. So I have mentioned my email ID, please note it down. Thank you so much.
Thank you.